Hello, my name is Francisco Javier Martinez. I am a researcher, a medical historian, working at the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of History, Cultures and Society of the University of Évora in Portugal. My presentation will deal with the containment of chemical warfare in Spain during the Rif War. What do I mean exactly by containment? 100 years have passed since chemical weapons were first used in a massive scale during the First World War. Historians of warfare have focused during this long period mostly on the production and use of chemical weapons and the eventual effects on soldiers and the civil population. However, there is a neglected aspect which has to do with the containment efforts taken by the states, the belligerent states, to prevent eventual domestic impacts. Of course, there's one aspect of this containment that has received large attention, which regards the protection of soldiers against the effect of chemical weapons in the battleground, with special attention paid to gas mask, respirator, clothes, and other protective gear, and also to a number of tactical and strategic measures, such as the construction of subterranean underground trenches or the design of counteroffensive as a dissuasion for stopping chemical attacks by the enemy. However, we think that the containment of chemical warfare comprise a much larger set of measures that reach beyond the battleground and the army to society at large. So we could explore political, social, work measures, also measures of population security, environmental security, etc. These aspects have only recently begun to receive attention by experts on chemical warfare. So we propose here to account for this larger set of measures, the concept of military containment, and we define it like this: the measures deployed for preventing all sorts of damages and disorders caused by military activities and operations, in the rearguard and in the battlefield, in times of war and in times of peace. So the containment of chemical warfare would be a specific form of military containment in relation to the production and use of chemical weapons. We are going to explore this military containment, this containment of chemical warfare, for the particular case of the Rif War, a conflict between Spain, France, and northern Moroccan insurgents that took place between 1921 and 1927. The Rif War was one of the interwar period conflicts where the use of chemical weapons has been recorded. Other were the Russian Civil War, the British campaign in Iraq, the Italian wars in Syria and Abyssinia, and the initial stages of the Second Sino-Japanese War. This is a picture of the theater of operations, which comprised the northern part of Morocco, close to the Mediterranean coast. From 1990, the topic of chemical warfare in Morocco began to receive attention by historians, and a lot of bibliography has been produced, especially in the 1990s and in the 2000s. However, this bibliography have focused mostly on the question of the production of chemical weapons and the use and eventual effects of the use upon the Moroccan soldiers and civil population. So the containment measures for the case of Spain have not been explored, and this is what our paper tries to address. So we will be focusing on three specific containment measures: those addressed to workers in military and civil industries that were producing gases, those addressed to the healthcare staff of hospitals in which soldiers or workers exposed to gas had to be treated and taken care of. And finally, measures addressed to protect the general population of Spanish Morocco and Spain. We will begin by measures addressed to workers. And we will focus on the La Marañosa factory, which was the factory that the army set up for the production of chemical weapons in Spain. In the La Marañosa factory, in the year 1926, a workshop for the filling of shells with a fumiginous substance was set up. And a number of military officers that were working there left some description of this workshop and how it evolved in time to ensure higher safety for the workers there. So in the beginning, the filling of shells with this fumiginous substance was done in a single and very modest hut or shed. The fumiginous substance arriving at the factory in metal drums in liquid state was pumped into a recipient that was placed within the hut or shed. And this recipient had several locks to let the liquid flow into graduated glass bottles. Open top shells were placed below the bottles, and the workers opened the locks manually, and once the required quantity of substance had passed through the bottles and filled the shells, they closed them again. Then the upper half of the shells had to be screwed and then sealed with mastic cement. So we see here a very simple and very manual procedure that was performed, that was done in a hut or shed. And this is a picture of La Marañosa factory in 1933, so a later period. And we have been unable to locate exactly where the workshop was, the workshop site. However, some months later, this workshop was transformed to improve workers, the safety of workers. So the process of shell filling became more complex and was separated into a number of distinct operations. So the first of them was the unpacking of shells that arrived at the factory. Second, the cleaning and pressing of shells and the removal of the detonators. Third, shell filling as such, with the fumiginous substance. Four, replacement of the detonator and mastic seal. Five, identification and separation of shells with fume escapes for mastic resealing. And finally, shell packing. So these operations were now carried out in 4 sheds or huts, so 4 different sheds of huts, and I quote, to achieve maximum ventilation, and also so that workers who were often shrouded in smoke could do their job more comfortably. Despite these changes and improvements, the process remained very weakly automatized. And the average output of this workshop remained low, so it was like 50 shells per hour, so 400 shells a day. Nothing is said in the officer's report about workers wearing gloves, mask, or any other kind of protective gear. The second type of containment measures regards the healthcare staff of hospitals. Both the production of chemical weapons and its transport, storage, and use by the Spanish army in the Rif War resulted in a number of casualties among Spanish workers and soldiers. So these gassed, or these soldiers and workers that had been exposed to gas, they had to be treated in hospitals, and the hospital staff needed to wear protective gear to be able to intervene on the patients without the chemical substance persisting in the patient's body or clothes, causing them damage and thereby compromising the whole assistance scheme. We have found, for example, that in 1924, a military hospital in Spanish Morocco requested 4 caoutchouc aprons and 4 masks of the German type to the War Ministry. So this material was sent very quickly. However, the speed of the arrival did not guarantee that the material could be immediately used. So the doctors or the director of the hospital complained that the material had been sent without instructions, so they didn't know how to use it. And they were not sure that the material that had arrived, for example, the mask, was appropriate for to be used against hyperide. So that the idea was to use this mask to treat patients that had been exposed to hyperide. So this is a picture of nurses in World War I, not in the Rif War, with wearing this protective gear, this mask. So the War Ministry replied to the director of the military hospital and informed him that, and I quote, "These are not so-called war masks. They are made to protect the user against dust and infectious agents. But as they also have independent valves for inspired and expired air, as well as 2 air purifying filters, if an appropriate neutralizer or neutralizing substance is placed in them, the mask can also be used for toxic gases." So first, so the question was not just to send the material, but to give instructions, and the material had also to be adapted. Some transformations had to be done in the mask, for example, to make them appropriate for use with patients that had been exposed to mustard gas, to hyperide. Finally, a third set of containment measures were those addressed to protect the general population of Spanish Morocco and Spain. So, for example, these considerations of security were behind the election of La Marañosa as the site for establishing a chemical weapons factory. La Marañosa was located 25 kilometers southeast of Madrid, and an army commission was appointed in 1922, and it came to the conclusion that a terrain of 1,000 per 400 meters was required, to which a security perimeter of 3 kilometers should be added in prevention of an eventual accident or an escape of toxic gases. So in October of 1922, the army finally purchased a 700-hectare land plot, which was called La Marañosa, located within the municipalities of Getafe and Vacia Madrid, to start the construction of the factory. Here you can see where La Marañosa is located. It's quite close to Madrid. However, neither Madrid nor the satellite towns and cities were as large in 1925 or in 1922 as they are today. Some military officers working in La Marañosa confirmed that the site had been chosen because of, and I quote, its remoteness from villages and agricultural zones, and it's having a large stripe of land owned by the factory as security zone. Even the workers' village had to be built 2 kilometers away from the factory facilities due to reasons of hygiene and security. So security was paramount. The protection of the nearby population against eventual hazards and accidents was paramount, to the point of compromising the very function of the factory. And in fact, one of the main reasons behind the failure of La Marañosa to produce chemical weapons in large quantities is its location, the site of its location. For example, the water that was needed for the production of liquid chlorine and for other chemical process could never arrive in a sufficient flow. The river Jarama was located 100 meters below the level of the factory terrain, and a pumping system was built, but it was not enough to provide a sufficient water flow. So this compromised the whole production process of chemical weapons in La Marañosa. Here we can see a picture, old pictures and current images of the location of the factory and the workers' town in La Marañosa. So to conclude, containment should be regarded as an integral part of chemical warfare. So if a state states that carried out chemical warfare against another country did not just need to produce and use chemical weapons, but also to adopt a whole set of containment measures that reach beyond the battlefield and the army to society at large. So it is these matters of containment, the material aspects of these containment measures that we have explored for the particular case of the Rif War in 1921 and 1927. So we have briefly sketched some of the measures that were taken by Spanish authorities. One, to protect the workers in factories that were producing chemical weapons. Two, to protect healthcare staff in hospitals that deal with patients that have been exposed to gas. And finally, measures addressed to the general population. So thank you very much.